It's been a while since we've done a review, but coming back to The First Descendant, it felt like a fitting reunion. Now, for any of you who've been here since the beginning, first off, thank you, and secondly, you most likely remember our initial review covering the open beta. Though, at the time, we didn't have access to all the content such as in-game activities and monetization. However, this time, we've got it all, and we put in over 100 hours just to see what this game has to offer. I'm your host, Morgan, and this is our full review of The First Descendant. Let's go ahead and start things off with the story, as this is going to be the first thing you'll need to complete in order to access all the content this game truly has to offer. Now, we're not going to give any spoilers here, so don't worry if you haven't completed the game. For a brief rundown, you're part of a group known as the First Descendants, which are essentially supercharged humans with arc powers, and you've been tasked with retrieving an infinite energy source known as the Iron Heart. However, you're not the only ones who are seeking it, as years ago, dimensional gates began to open up and the planet was invaded by the Vulgus, who wished to harness this power for their own plans, as well as the Colossi, which are these giant beings with powerful weapons. The story sounded interesting when we first read about it, however, as much as we really wanted to enjoy it, we just couldn't. There were several issues that really ruined it for us, the first one being the terrible dialogue that often made the characters feel dull and unexpressive, almost as if there was no real personality to any of them. Pretty much everyone you came across just felt like some stranger hanging out in a new zone with a few favors they wanted to ask you to complete for them. Then there was the issue with the lip syncing, where you'd see the mouth moving and no sound coming out. Finally, there's moments where they're talking to you after you've completed a mission and it goes on for what feels like 5 minutes, but you can't progress until they're through. Now, I will say there were about 1 or 2 cutscenes that we did enjoy, and if you played through this story, then you probably already know the ones we're talking about. But overall, not the greatest experience. Hopefully, any future expansions will do a lot better with character development and lore building. Now it's time to get into the gameplay, and this is one area that really helped ease some of the pain of the story. The First Descendant has a very satisfying combat system, with every weapon offering its own stats, from firing speed to damage per second and reload time, that can all be modified through the game's module system, which we'll cover in more depth in the crafting portion of the video. The weapon we found ourselves spending the most time with was the Thunder Cage. This one is an ultimate weapon, which if you're a Destiny fan would also be known as an exotic. The Thunder Cage had a really great perk for mob clear, as upon killing an enemy, it would create an AoE shockwave that would kill the enemies around it. This is extremely helpful when you're consistently fighting large groups of enemies, which you're going to be dealing with vast amounts of, as every mission tends to barrage you with enemies, so there's rarely a dull moment. This, however, tends to be both a blessing and a curse, as we often found ourselves running out of general rounds that never seemed to be generally around when we needed them the most. For example, most bosses in this game are just walking bullet sponges with either one of 2 stages. Either they will surround themselves with enemies you must dispose of, or there will be floating orbs above their head that must be destroyed before you can enter the next damage phase. If they could just do something about the sparse ammo, such as increase the drop rate, or even just make general rounds infinite similar to how Destiny works, this would solve our only major complaint here. Outside of the bosses, there are a few more enemy mechanics that can be a hassle to deal with, especially when they start to stack up. For example, some enemies can only be shot in the head, which can be frustrating to deal with if you're using any kind of automatic weapon. It becomes even worse if they also have a barrier that prevents long-range damage. The worst one we had to deal with had both of those buffs, as well as a tether to all the surrounding enemies, making them all immune to damage until he was eliminated. This made for an awful experience when you're trying to kill an enemy up close who's surrounded by a bunch of invincible enemies blocking your shots. And all of this was going on while we had to stand on a point while a percent gauge filled up, so there was not a lot of room for maneuverability. I mean, I get making things challenging on hard mode, but sometimes these random buff generators just take things a bit too far. Another mechanic we really enjoyed was the movement system, which might not have the bullet jumping speed of Warframe, but the grappling hook is extremely fun to use. It's kind of similar to Spider-Man's web slinger, except you only get 2 charges before having to wait on a cooldown, which is unfortunate considering how much we love using this thing. Not only is it good for maneuvering around the map, but it's highly versatile in combat, as you can either use it to get behind an enemy that has a shield to get in some damage, or use it to gain momentum and avoid damage yourself. It also plays a small role in void boss battles, as you can use the grappling hook to attach onto their weak points and rip the armor off. With all that being said, we generally had a good time shooting enemies, overcoming challenging void bosses, and swinging around like Spider-Man. One area for improvement, however, would be increasing the ammo drops or making general rounds unlimited. It's time to unpack all the various forms of content the First Descendant brings to the table. As we mentioned before, the game does have a campaign you'll need to progress through, which should net you a solid 13 plus hours to complete, give or take a few depending on how fast you can rush it. Once completed, you'll have access to all the various farming locations as well as hard mode activities, which grants you higher level item drops and new materials. The majority of the endgame is centered all around farming materials and utilizing those materials to research new weapons or descendants. Some items can be obtained through completing operations, which are dungeons. However, there's no guarantee you'll get the drop you're hunting for, as almost everything operates on a chance-based system. Just to stack even more layers of complexity to the farming, they also have a loot box system called amorphous material. These have a chance of dropping when you complete a recon mission and a guaranteed drop if you complete a hard mode operation. In order to open one of these up, you'll have to defeat the associated void boss, in which case you'll randomly receive one of the rewards inside. This is why farming is such a hassle in this game, as pretty much everything is chance-based and the solution to everything is conveniently located in the cash shop. Outside of acquiring resources, another aspect to the game is leveling. This is something you will be doing a lot of, as every time you socket a new catalyst into your weapon, it resets your proficiency back to level 1, and this same mechanic also applies to your descendant. But this is also the main way to increase your power in this game, as every time you apply a catalyst to your weapon or descendant, it cuts the cost of the module in that socket by half, giving you more points to spend on other mods. Genuinely, a lot of people tend to do special operations for this, which has 3 different modes. One of them involves defending resources from oncoming waves. The next has you destroying drills at different locations. And the final one has you preventing a dimensional gate from opening. While they all have different tasks, they operate in the same way. You kill a certain amount of enemies or hold off for a certain time period and you complete the wave. It's pretty much a game of survival. Periodically, you'll hit checkpoints that ask if you want to proceed or leave with the rewards you've earned. The longer you stay, the better the rewards. However, you risk losing the rewards you've earned up until that point. Out of these, we prefer the defense, as you don't really have to move around that much and the mobs spawn in fairly quickly. So those are the 2 main areas of leveling you'll probably be focusing on, but there's still one more, and that's mastery level. This is kind of like a prestige system, where no matter the character you're on, anytime you're doing activities, it contributes towards your mastery level. Once you reach a new mastery level, you get a few benefits, such as extra module socket capacity, as well as additional inventory and storage space. Just a few little perks that add up over the long run. Now, we mentioned void boss battles a few times, but haven't really gone in depth. But this is going to be another point of interest in the endgame, as a lot of components for crafting weapons and descendants come from these. This is probably the area where I've seen majority of players struggle, as these fights are generally pretty drawn out and you need to have really good DPS and defenses in order to win. These fights have a 10-minute timer they must be completed in, and if more than 3 people die, it's an instant fail. Generally, they're pretty straightforward, though there are a few that have mechanics and require teamwork. I personally found it a lot easier to solo or duo it with a friend than to queue up for a party, as their HP is based on the amount of players that enter the instance. The only major complaint we have for the Void Intercept battles is that every single one feels like it takes place in a test facility, and we'd much rather experience these out in the open world, similar to what the original trailer showed us. The last thing we want to cover in this section is enhancing, as it's another major part of how you'll be spending your time. There's 3 main components to this, and that's weapons, mods, and reactors. Each of these has stats associated with them and can be upgraded or modified. For example, every weapon has 4 stats associated with it, and these can be modified at the workbench, but we'll go over all of that in more detail in the crafting portion of this video. Now, I know we just covered several activities to do in the game, but all of it's just based around farming, and most activities feel like they're just copy-pasted to a new location. We'd love to see some more competitive raids or even a ranking system on void bosses. Crafting in this game is fairly straightforward, and there's a few places you'll be spending most of your time during this process. First, you've got the workbench, where you'll be handling all of your weapon enhancements like changing the modifiers, the weapon level, and increasing the perk. This is also the same place you'll be able to enhance your reactor. The workbench isn't bad for the most part. However, changing your weapon's modifiers is done through this painstaking gacha system. The way it works is by spending these crafted items called adjustment axes, you can re-roll the modifiers on your weapon. However, each time you get one you like and lock it in, it will cost more on your next roll. Eventually, this becomes extremely costly and you have to gather the materials and wait on them to be crafted at a max stack of 20, which will only give you one roll when you're on the last modifier. Then you've got the Modules Lab, where you can spend your golden Kuiper shards to upgrade the modules for both your weapons and Descendants. If you've ever played Warframe, this system should feel very familiar. There are tons of modules for you to try out here, so if you're someone who likes build crafting and trying to find the best way to increase your damage, this is where you'll do it. Finally, there's the research facility where you'll be unlocking new weapons, Descendants, and enhancement items. This is another part that should feel very familiar if you're a Warframe fan. The system itself isn't terrible, but the grind for some of the items you need to craft, like Descendants, crystallization catalysts, and energy activators, can feel overwhelming at times. And they know people are going to feel that way, so they offer the solution in the cash shop where you can just buy all of these items for credits. Now, if you're ever confused on how to acquire any of the items needed for researching, the game does provide all of this information under the Access Info tab, located on the same screen as your map. Once you've located the item you want to craft, simply hold the F key on one of the parts to see where it's located. Overall, the crafting experience offers a decent time frame on researching, but feels extremely harsh when it comes to obtaining certain items, almost like they're intentionally pushing you towards the cash shop. On the topic of credits, we need to talk about the part that's really creating a divide in the community, and that's the monetization. While the game is free to play, there are a lot of helpful items you can buy to ease the grind. However, a lot of these items come at a steep cost. For example, if you want to buy a Descendant, the cheapest will run you 300 caliber, which just so happens to be 50 caliber more than you can acquire with the $5 pack, meaning you'll have to spend at least $10 to purchase a Descendant. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the Ultimate Descendants, and these are going to set you back a full $70. That price is absolutely wild in our opinion. And it doesn't stop there, because you can also buy energy activators and crystallization catalysts from the store. These are both items that will add more module capacity to your Descendants and weapons, which in essence is just buying power. Needless to say, we weren't extremely happy with the cash shop in this game, but honestly, we weren't very surprised either. This is, after all, the same company who was recently fined roughly $9 million for changing the probability of receiving certain items from loot boxes to 0% in Maple Story and Bubble Fighter. So they're not exactly operating on the best track record. Finally, the game does offer a battle pass for 500 credits, and this is the one area we don't have too much to complain about because it seems like you're actually getting a good value from it. The pass gives you back some of the caliber you spent to help with the purchase of the next battle pass. Kind of like Helldivers. If you played that one, then you know what we're talking about. Now it is officially time for us to break all this down into the good and the bad. Let's start off with the good. There's plenty of Descendants for you to pick from, with each offering their own unique playstyle. As for the movement system, we found it extremely satisfying between the double jump and the grappling hooks. The gunplay feels very well polished, and each type has its own unique feel and sound. There's loads of customization options between the mod system and weapons perks. The visuals are pretty good, though it does lean heavily into fan service. Void boss battles provide for a challenging experience and leave you with a sense of gratification each time you overcome one. There's loads of in-game activities for you to grind out, so you should never find yourself short on things to do. Lastly, the menu system makes it very easy to find almost any item in the game, which comes in handy with how much farming you'll need to do to unlock everything. That's it for the good, now let's get into the bad. The story to this game felt devoid of all personality and was bland at best. All of the zones feel empty outside of the missions, which is something they did work on, and you'll occasionally see a group of roaming enemies, but it's not enough to really make it feel active. Void boss battles all take place in an area that feels like a testing environment, unlike in the trailer where they were fighting a colossi in the open world. We would also like to see more bosses that require group play, as most of them are more centered around avoiding damage while dealing as much damage as possible. Then there's the massive ammo issue, where you're consistently running out and it just feels like the drops for general rounds should either be increased or unlimited. The menu system offers loads of valuable information, but it often feels very hidden as there's no real help when it comes to navigation. Also, there's no way to filter items based on the stats, which would really help sort through the massive amount of items that will fill up your inventory. Then there's the prices for some of the items in the cash shop that seem somewhat predatory, as well as the direct sale of power boosting items. Couple that up with the fact that currently there's no trading in the game, meaning those who can't afford these items will have to farm the materials to research them. Finally, there's the issue with AFK players who are benefiting equally in all the rewards, which can be quite frustrating at times, and there's currently nothing you can do about it. With all of that in mind, we still find ourselves logging in every day and having a lot of fun, which at the end of the day is the most important part. While we get this game might not be great, it's also not terrible. I'd say if you just want to have some fun and you're not trying to rush things or be competitive, then this might be worth checking out. But as with any review, keep in mind that everything said here has been based on our own experiences, and your thoughts might be very different than ours depending on what aspects you enjoy most. So we'd highly recommend trying it out for yourself and making your own decision on how you feel about the game. That's going to bring us to the end of this review. However, if you played The First Descendant, we'd love to know your thoughts on the game. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Or just what do you think that they could have done better on? And as always, if you haven't yet, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. That way you're notified every time we drop a new video. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.